My name's Lacey, and on this channel, I use weekly themes to set parameters and guidelines and help me compartmentalize my ideas. And it's Vinyl Week. This is a tutorial for the Stardom Young baby quilt. You may notice that it is a circle, and it is a circle with more circles. Baby quilts kind of have their own rules, and I often think of a baby quilt being thrown over a crib, thrown on the floor for playtime. I think that baby quilts are the one example of where you can get away with a circle.
I'm including a list of the materials I used. It's very adaptable. Use what you have.
This is an applique quilt. The center is one piece. The smaller center is another piece. The large black fabric is all one piece. The backing is not circle. It's cut down to a circle. So the backing can be one piece of fabric. It can be patchwork like mine is. My quilt finished about 42 inches in diameter. It's a nice size for a baby quilt. This design is customizable. You just have to stick to some proportions. But the center applique piece is a third of the diameter of the entire quilt. There's not very much math. Don't get scared. There's circles, but there's not much math. It's mostly just one measurement and a straight edge. And if you're ever nervous about cutting circles or bias binding or a lot of bias binding, this is a good project to get you over that fear. Although I'm not personally a vinyl collector, I do know quite a few, and one just had a baby. I thought, make a baby quilt that looks like a vinyl record. Mine is inspired by the old Capitol Records LPs. They have this ombre rainbow. But if you had an embroidery machine, or if you wanted to use this as your quilt label, you could put a baby name. You can have a lot of fun with however you want to do the center. This is basically the paper label on an album. The quilting shows the tracks, the grooves on the record, and the circle quilting reflects on the back. The process of cutting a circle is very similar to when you cut a circle skirt, but we are not cutting a waist. We're just doing it with one cut. And I'm going to show you a trick that helps me. If you're new to cutting circles, it can be a little confusing. And I picked up this tip from some circle skirt tutorial along the way on my sewing journey, and it's really helpful. So what you can do is take a scrap piece of fabric, quilting cotton, scrap fabric. Doesn't have to be too big, but it'll help you just verify that you're folding correctly. So you're going to fold those selvages long ways, and then you're going to bring it over. So you always want fold on the top, fold on the side, open on the bottom, open on the right. And that's how you should fold your large piece for the black part of the record. But if you just want to check, you can just test it and kind of cut your small circle. This doesn't have to be a perfect circle, but it should tell you, okay, did that in one piece. That's how I want to fold this fabric. But it'll just reassure you before you cut your circle that it's going to create a circle.
So we folded the fabric selvage to selvage and then folding it again. So the open sides are on the right and the bottom, and all you're doing is marking your measurement the whole way. I'm trying to get as much of a circle out of this one piece of fabric as I can, so I'm going almost to the selvage. Be sure to keep your ruler straight edge, always starting at the very point on this top left fold of fabric, right there where my hand was. Always keep it there, move accordingly. Usually I prefer a rotary cutter. This is one example where scissors are going to give you more control. So you want to open it up, make sure that it is a full circle, that you have cut it correctly. Let your cat walk all over it. You know, they'll test it out. Oh, good stretch, Blixa, thanks for your help. Yeah, it's a full circle. Blixa approved. Now, I'm looking at a real record. You can see that I painted on the back of this one, but I'm trying to figure out how big the paper label on a real record is. 12-inch record, 4 inches for a label, 4 inches on each side. My fabric circle right now is about 44 inches. I'm dividing that by 3. It's not really an even number. I ended up deciding to go about 14 and a quarter, 14 and a half, but my fabric wasn't quite big enough, so 14 and a quarter. This is a flexible concept, so you just want to keep in mind your math might be different. Just divide into thirds. This time we're cutting to a specific diameter, so the 14 and a quarter. So when I fold this fabric, it's not exactly the same as the black fabric, because the black fabric, we were going to get as much out of that as possible. Here we're going for a specific size, so you're going to fold it the same way, but when you mark your measurement, remember it is again,
half
I
of
strongly
that diameter.
recommend
So we're
cutting
gonna
with
go just
scissors
over 7.
over a rotary cutter. It would be very easy to slide or slip and cut into the circle. And this was the only piece of fabric that I had that looked like this, so I had to be very careful. Yeah, as soon as you put the second circle down on the first circle, you can already tell that it looks like a record, even if you don't have a cat paperweight. This step is optional. I am trying to recreate those capital record labels, so they are black in the center with the ring of the rainbow ombre around them. So I am actually making a third small circle, same exact way, folded twice and from the top left corner, and this time I'm measuring 5 and a quarter because I want to leave about 2 inches of that rainbow fabric showing. Doesn't quite look like a vinyl record until it has that hole in the center. So I am making one with vinyl. I chose vinyl because I wanted a material that could be left raw edge. And I'm just using like a leather punch. It didn't work very well, but it at least left me a circle that I could cut around. Now that everything is cut, it is time to start building the applique pieces of the quilt. This is an applique quilt. We're not trying to sew any circles together. We are building circles on top of other circles. This is the smallest black circle. I am applying a Fusible Fleece to the back of it. I just wanted to give it some structure, but still leave it soft and pliable enough to work as a baby quilt. It has to be washable. It has to be able to be moved around. I also wanted to give the rainbow fabric some structure. I was all out of Fusible Fleece, so this is just a cotton quilt batting. If you have Fusible Fleece, you can skip this step, or even like a basting spray. I needed to secure the ombre rainbow fabric to that quilt batting. So because I know that it is the middle layer, it's not the top layer, I can find the center, make an X, and sew just an X like in a box around it, just to secure it enough that it doesn't move around and shift on me, because it is a circle and we want to keep things as even as possible. This next step is optional, but I wanted to add a decorative element that kind of gave the illusion of text, and I am just using pinking shears so that I can applique it down and not have to worry about the fabric fraying too much. I think that any tool that helps you sew things more precisely and simply and makes the whole process easier is a good thing. So little drop of glue, this is leather glue, and a little swipe of a glue stick. If it just helps hold, especially when you're doing applique, if it helps hold everything together, it'll make the whole sewing process much less annoying, less swearing probably too. So you want to mark the center of your circle for where you're going to place the hole, but that glue isn't dry. This isn't attached permanently yet, so just you can adjust, move it around, and you want to just check that you have the same amount of fabric on each side. I'm adding that decorative applique element of the striped fabric, again just kind of lining it up. A little bit of glue on the back. For applique, it's pretty necessary, especially to decrease frustration. So a little bit of glue, make sure it's on there, make sure it stays where you want it to. Now we're finally ready to sew. I'm going to stitch down first the rectangle piece. Honestly, for me, it was a nice warm-up because I know I have to sew that tiny circle. So I just kind of went around twice, secured that down. Like I said, it's pinky shears on the edge, so it's not going to fray much, but I just wanted to secure it there. The small hole in the center, that little bit of vinyl to sew down, was probably one of the more fiddly bits of the whole thing. I just went slowly, 1 or 2 stitches, turn, lift the needle, hand crank, just go slow, and leave about 1/8 of an inch around so it doesn't pull up too much. It's getting to the fun part because you can see as we're building how it's starting to come together. At this point, we have 3 distinct pieces of the quilt. We have the small black circle, we have the rainbow ombre circle, and then we have the large black circle, which is off to the side for now. We are just concentrating on the top 2 circles. I want to make sure that I can put this black circle back on the rainbow ombre evenly without doing the math all again and without too much measuring. So I'm using a heat friction pen to mark where I want it to go. These markings are visible, so if you don't have a pen that will disappear with heat, just use chalk. So now we have our 3 pieces, and all 3 pieces have raw edges. And we know that eventually we're going to bind a quilt, but we're also going to bias bind the applique components. This might be a little intimidating to some people. It's honestly not so bad. Bias binding isn't so different than straight binding. It's just cut on the 45-degree angle of fabric because it needs to stretch. We want it to stretch. You don't want your straight binding to stretch on a regular quilt, but we do want this to stretch because we want it to move smoothly around the curve of an arc. You can purchase different widths of bias binding and you can make your own. And due to circumstances and only having a small amount, I'm gonna do both. I'm using 3 yards of 1/2 inch double fold extra wide bias tape, which I bought at the going out of business sale of Joann's, so this might be the last thing I ever bought from Joann's. Because double fold bias binding that you buy, it's already creased and ironed. It sits really nicely, so it's even. You just have to clip alongside. You want to stretch because you don't want to end up with a pucker and too much fabric at the bottom. You really want to pull tautly, fit that along there. I'm going to do something that the quilt police will probably have an issue with, and that is joining binding ends with a straight seam. I was really limited on the amount of bias tape that I had. Joining ends together is honestly something I have to watch a video every time, and it usually takes me multiple times. This is just so fiddly, I just didn't want to do it. If you have enough to do it and can do it and do a bias join and you think that that looks better, do it. I just didn't have enough, so all I'm going to do is fold the raw edges under, line them up, and sew over the whole thing. Now we're going to stitch the binding down the entire way around the circle, just moving the clips out of the way as you go. I usually use, it's probably slightly over a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Use your preferred seam allowance, and you can always do a second row of stitching if you think you didn't get close enough to the inside edge. Now that the top circle is completely bound and finished, we have to attach it to the middle layer of applique. So that's that rainbow ombre fabric on mine. This is why we drew those circle markings with the friction pen. This is just so I can lay it out a little easier, but I am going to check and make sure everything's about 2 inches around all the way. Whenever things are circles, even to the naked eye, it's pretty obvious when things are just a little bit off. So you want to be as precise as possible. Once you're happy with where everything is situated, pin it in place because you have to move it to the sewing machine because we are going to stitch just inside that bias binding. I just placed the right side of my presser foot touching that bias binding, the inside edge of it, just lining them up together. I am going to go back and sew a second row of stitching on top of that bias tape, but I wanted to do the first round of stitching where there is less fabric because we're adding a whole other layer. It's harder to get through. We want this to be what holds it in place, and then we can add reinforcement. Okay, this is another slightly fiddly bit. It's already stitched down to the rainbow ombre fabric. I'm just adding a little bit more reinforcement, and I'm making another circle in the center about a 1/2 inch around the vinyl hole. That helps it look more like a record too. Now that we have secured the top applique piece, one thing we have to do before we can move on to the rainbow ombre fabric is just do a real quick 1/8 of an inch, really close stitch to the edge to that batting, and that is just to secure it before we trim it down. I carefully cut away the excess batting. I am using scissors more in this project than I ever do, but you do have to be really careful. Now that that is done, it is on to round 2 of bias binding. I am applying this binding the exact same way that we did to the smaller black circle. You want to leave some overhang. You're going to stretch and clip the whole way around the rainbow ombre fabric, the larger circle. Again, sewing it with about 1/4 inch seam allowance, maybe slightly over. And I am going to finish this one with a straight seam as well. I am tucking one bias strip under the other bias strip, and then I am folding the top exposed bias strips, and I'm just folding that raw edge under, so there are no raw edges on any of the bias tape. I had already sewed almost the entire way around the circle once before I stopped to finish and fold under those raw edges. So after I did that, I'm sewing that piece, and then I'm just going around again for extra security. Personally, I almost always do a pieced backing on a quilt, and this is no exception. And I didn't even film too much of it because this part does not look like a record. It can be whatever fabric you want it to be. The only thing is that you make it bigger than the large black circle, and you can leave it square. We don't have to worry about anything being rounded on the backing. I'm starting to lay out my quilt backing, my batting. It should also be a couple inches bigger than the black circle fabric. I do Frankenstein batting together, and so you can see that seam down the right side. The next step, we're finished with the top 2 pieces of applique, and they are one piece now, but that piece needs to be attached to the center of the large black circle. We are attaching the paper label to the record. So now I'm just kind of trying to figure out if it's centered, and the way I'm doing that isn't by any mathematical way. I'm just looking to see if I can get the same distance the whole way around the quilt. I'm going to use basting pins, and I am attaching the applique piece to the large black circle, and I am basting all the way through all the layers, including the batting and the backing. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, before you put down your backing fabric and your batting and lay it on top and figure it all out like I did, just lay down the black fabric, find the center where you want the paper label applique piece to go, then you can attach that and then lay it all down on your quilt sandwich like you would typically, and it's already pieced together. I'm just doing it all at the same time because I already had everything laid out. And then I'm just going to continue to crawl around on the floor and baste like I normally do. Now we're ready to start quilting. I am starting close to the center. I just want to start securing that applique piece so it doesn't move around, because remember, it's just basted. So we're going to start by sewing through all the layers, quilting our way, starting with that, sewing directly on that outside bias tape. I'm also going to do another row of stitching on the black center applique part, just about 1/4 inch away from one of the earlier lines of stitching. It's all black thread on black fabric. It just adds texture, but what we're really doing is securing that applique piece down and quilting all the way through it. Normally, I'm the last person to tell anyone how to quilt anything. However, this really does need to be done a certain way to get the effect of a record. So I would say if you hate hemming circle skirts, this is not the project for you because it does use a lot of thread. Think of it like concentric circle matchstick quilting. I started from towards the inside where the applique met and just started stitching around. And I was back stitching at the beginning and the end, trying to hit the same spot again. This isn't a spiral, these are concentric circles. And I mostly just eyeballed moving over about a ½ inch because I could not find my walking foot with the guide on it. So I did use a couple different presser feet just to kind of try. I will say if you work from the inside out, you never have that much fabric. You're never wrestling that much fabric. If you work the other direction, it is a little more awkward, but it's never too much because it is a baby quilt. Also, this is 100% cotton batting, and it pills like crazy on this black fabric, so I didn't even film that much because it just looks like a mess. Flipping it over to the backing, you can see the concentric circle quilting. It still kind of looks like a record even on the backing. So I'm varying the distance between the concentric circles. It kind of gives that record-like appearance. A real record, the songs are different lengths, so they can be whatever. I'm just working my way to the outside, and then when I get to the very edge, it does get a little bit, I'm wearing gloves to help push the fabric through, but it does get a little bit roughly. So make sure to hold everything down and go slowly. This next step, totally optional. I saw someone do it once though, and now I do it on all my quilts. I am using a serger to trim the excess batting off of the quilt. It also finishes that quilt so it's going to sit really nicely when you go to put the binding on top of it. If you don't have a serger, definitely not necessary. This is just kind of a bonus. And I don't use my serger that often because I don't make garments that often. So it's nice that it gets used every once in a while. Our record baby quilt is almost done. Now all that's left is just the binding.
For the bias binding, you can buy pre-made bias binding. This is ½ inch bias binding. I also didn't have enough for the whole exterior, so I did have to make my own bias binding. And for that, I just recommend you watch a video. I personally can never wrap my head around the kind that you cut from one continuous strip, but I did cut a bunch of strips from 45-degree angle and sew them together. There's really good tutorials for how to do it on the internet. So to get the measurement for how much bias binding you need, you can kind of lay it out on the smaller circles. For the outer circle, all I did was lay it on the floor and measure as far around. I measured, basically I could get almost halfway around the diameter of the quilt. Then I just doubled that and then I added more. So mine was I made about 140 inches of bias tape and had enough left over. You always just want extra, even though it's annoying. You don't want to run short. So.
And I am going to do a proper bias join because I do have enough to go around. And yes, it's gonna take me like 4 tries. This is the exact same process we've already done twice with the applique circles. We leave a long overhang and then start clipping and stretching the bias binding the whole way around the diameter of the quilt. If you don't know how to join quilt binding ends together, I recommend watching a video. That's what I always do. I have to do it every time. I messed it up usually a couple times. I always end up getting irritated because they're twisted in a way that they're not supposed to be, and I have to unpick it a couple times. So that happened with this one too. But once you get that on there, it's pretty easy. I actually thought it was kind of easier to bind this bias binding quilt than it is it is to find a square quilt or a rectangular quilt. I was pretty surprised. So just go all the way around. Like I said, I start with like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I was using a hemming foot, and then I did another row just to make sure everything on the back side was attached down as well.
If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. And if you think you're going to make one, or you know that a vinyl collector would make a good present for, hit the like and subscribe, because I'm always coming up with new random projects. Thanks for watching.